Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And I just want to thank the people that came by and watched our new video last night. I uploaded it a little bit late, but I was editing for a majority of the day on it. But D&D nights will or D&D night will be a continuing series. I already have enough material probably for at least another 5 or 6 episodes, but they will be shorter in the future because that thing was a bitch to edit. So thank you again for anybody that watched that. And now going into today, I kind of wanted to have this discussion because there was a news story that actually came out that kind of sparked my interest a little bit because apparently California is planning on removing the name from the John Wayne Airport. It is going to go back to the Orange County Airport. Um, or at least that's what they're proposing, because of John Wayne's racist comments in the past, which I'm not going to go over any of that stuff. It's been gone over to death. It was gone over even when it was said. But I wanted to go into an argument that I think a lot of Western fans always have. It's kind of one of those eternal arguments, like the Batman versus Superman argument, and that is John Wayne versus Clint Eastwood Westerns. Um, and here's the thing with these is that a lot of people judge them as two very different animals. Now, forthcomingly, I side with. I think Eastwood sometimes and Wayne sometimes. Honestly, it could depend on the day. I love them both in terms of their westerns in most of the aspects of it. But there are key differences with, I guess, the staples that John Wayne was known for and the staples that Clint Eastwood was known for. So I'm going to kind of go over Wayne first because, he has a basically kind of like a higher volume. He made a lot more westerns than Eastwood did. So you have a lot more quantity, but maybe not so much quality, and I'll go into that. Now, John Wayne started doing westerns way, way back I think his first one was in the 40s. And he was also known for war films and stuff around that time as well, like Sands of Iwo Jima and things like that, which actually I think that was a little later in the 50s. But he started doing westerns very early, and that was really the main thing that he did. He did westerns, he did war movies, and he dabbled in cop movies a little bit. He didn't really do much else. I'm sure people are going to be able to point out outliers for that. I'm just saying a majority of them were westerns, and the ones that fell into those other categories. And he kind of, when he first came on the scene, he was kind of your stereotypical cowboy for the time. There was a movie where he played the guitar and sang because that was a thing at the time that a lot of people really attributed with the cowboy mythos before it evolved into kind of the desperado type of thing. And he did that stuff early, but then you saw that kind of evolve when you went into his later work in the 50s, where he evolved into the Duke. Basically, the Duke is kind of his moniker. He was the character, or he was referred to as the character in multiple films, and that was kind of his nickname was the Duke, and he was kind of the king of westerns, and everybody really knew that. Him and his oftentimes collaborative director John Ford, which Ford also directed a number of his more successful films, which I'll go over some of his outliers as well, because the outliers are the ones that I actually personally really love, other than a couple pick choices. But going into those type of westerns, which is really what takes up a bulk of, like I said, John Wayne's career, is all of these movies where he's the biggest guy on screen. That's why I kind of attribute it to Batman and Superman. Like, John Wayne's more the Superman of this scenario. He's bigger than Clint Eastwood. He's built bigger. He's big, big barrel chested and stuff. When you look at Clint Eastwood in a lot of those movies, he looks like a strong man. He stands very tall and stuff, but he's lanky. He's very, very lanky in those movies. Which is, that's what he was for a majority of his career, even when he was doing his Dirty Harry films. But Wayne is just this mass of man, and it feels like he could just throw you around the room if he wanted to. And again, early in his career, he wasn't as kind of bulky around the midsection, I guess. But again, he was still a very tall man. Who was in that role. So he was very intimidating from that perspective, but that was kind of his role, is he was this bigger than life character. He would come in, he'd shoot the bad guy, he'd get the girl, and, he'd look 10 different kinds of cool doing it. That was John Wayne for a majority of his career. And that was really the staple of the American community. But the thing is that as time went on, especially in the middle and later parts of his career, he would start making more westerns that were not in the traditional cookie cutter mold. But But actually, sorry, before I get to those, one Western that I do love that is kind of his cookie cutter one is El Dorado. I really do enjoy El Dorado. It's one of those kind of Westerns that it's so campy and it has so many of the tropes that you attribute with kind of those early 50s and 60s Westerns that were, the core of the American staple before kind of the sci-fi craze came in the 70s. And looking at all the actors that were in that movie, you had John Wayne, you had Robert Mitchum, you had a very young James Caan. Just so many people in that movie that obviously some of them would go on to bigger careers, or some of them were big at the time, like Robert Mitchum. And also Robert Mitchum had collaborated, I think, with John Wayne on a few other films before that as well. But looking at just El Dorado, he does a great job. He plays the drunken sheriff of the town who's trying to get off booze. I feel like that he had that a bit more from experience. Looking at that film, then even James Caan, who comes in as Mississippi, which is hilarious every time John Wayne has to pronounce that name. Is Mississippi. But I love when he does it in that movie because it's so funny that he can't shoot, so he just gives him a sawed-off shotgun to kill people with, which again is hilarious and kind of cool. But that's just kind of my fixation with that one movie. But moving on to his outliers, you look at movies like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Shootist, True Grit. Even kind of a throwback one too, like The Searchers, which was a little earlier on before kind of the end period of his career in the 70s. When John Wayne would play a jaded character, I feel like he always did it very well. He did it almost as good as he would do, the straight true blue hero that like everybody kind of knew him for in the westerns. But there's different things in each one of those movies that make his characters complex, and he does a very, very good job at portraying them. I think the earliest one out of that bunch was The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and that is him, Jimmy Stewart, and Lee Marvin as Liberty Valance. And John Wayne's character of Tom, I think his name is Tom in that movie. He is basically planning on marrying this woman in town. He's a rancher. He's up and coming. He's built an addition on his house already for it. And he's in love with her. And Jimmy Stewart's this new lawyer who comes into town and law and order and stuff like that. And eventually he gets into a gunfight with Liberty Valance, who's again played by Lee Marvin, who's kind of the ruffian of the area. He's the guy that he's kind of the outlaw that basically owns the town because all they have is a fat drunk sheriff. The only one that really ever checks him is John Wayne. But Jimmy Stewart gets into a gunfight with Liberty Valance, and he winds up seemingly killing Liberty Valance. And everybody heralds him for it, and it propels his political career forward. He winds up marrying the woman that John Wayne is also in love with. And John Wayne, after a certain point, explains to him, because he's having problems because he can't justify moving forward knowing that he's killed somebody in order to do it. He feels like the success was built on a body. John Wayne says that he didn't actually kill Liberty Valance, and John Wayne's character did. And he explains that he was in the shadows that night with a rifle, and at the same time when Jimmy Stewart shot his gun, he shot Liberty Valance with the rifle to make it seem like he was killed by Jimmy Stewart. And he basically gives up everything because he realizes that Jimmy Stewart is destined for far greater things than he is. And it would be selfish of him in a communal sense to get in the way of that because of all the good that he has the possibility of doing. And to let him die at the hands of Lee Marvin would have been a waste. So he plays a character that basically has everything ripped away from him, and it's kind of an amazing thing. And even at the start of the movie, you see most of this through flashbacks. At the beginning of the movie, which is supposed to be present day at the time, I guess. Well, not present at the time when it was made, but the present, the furthest point in time that we sit at, because we go back and forth. We see that John Wayne has died a lonely man, and he sacrificed everything. He's just a broken person that died, and the only friend he has left is Pompey, who's his helper on the farm or on the ranch, and that's it. And even the mourners, it's just basically the sheriff and I think Jimmy Stewart and his wife, and I think that's it, if I remember right from what the movie had. But you see that in that movie, then you move over to stuff like The Searchers, where a lot of it is, he's playing this character like he's trying to rescue his niece, and he's talking about, if they she was kidnapped by I think it was Cherokee in that movie. It was a one of the Indian tribes kidnapped her, and he was saying that if they've turned her, then he'll kill her and stuff like that. And you have this great scene where when he sees her for the first time, she just goes up and hugs him, and it's kind of like, okay, he can talk the talk, but when he's actually sitting there, would he have been able to do it? Kind of like a bad guy with a streak of good in him, basically. And then you move on to other movies like The Shootist, where he's this aging gunslinger, and actually True Grit too as well. But Shootist is a where he knows that he has a certain amount of time to live because he has cancer, and actually Jimmy Stewart pops back into that movie. So I kind of like to think that it's a little bit connected to the man who shot Liberty Valance, because it feels like Jimmy Stewart's almost playing a similar character, not the same. He's a doctor, not a politician, but um, and it's just supposed to be about the dark days of this guy's life. And John Wayne was actually dying of cancer when that movie was being filmed, and he died in 1979, I believe, the same year that film was released. But it was an amazing film, and it's deservedly his last movie because it has a great ending. But you can look at that, and then you look at True Grit. That's a complete classic that everybody loves, where he plays this, like, again, kind of a rough guy who actually has kind of a heart of gold with Rooster Cogburn, or I should say, a jaded guy that kind of has some good streaks in him on occasions when it comes to certain people. And John Wayne, I think, has the best line in that movie, where he's being questioned on a stand by a lawyer in a courtroom about a bounty that he brought in, because they said that he shot a man in the lower lip. And they were complaining that was somehow a violation of his rights or something like that. And Rooster Cog, he says, where were you aiming for? I was aiming for his upper lip. And it's a great line. It's a lot of back and forth in that movie is very, very good. And honestly, Rooster Cogburn is probably not the character that you think is going to do certain things in that movie, but he is. And then you also have Glenn Campbell coming in as LaBeef, the Texas Ranger, who also does a very good job in that film. And Glenn Campbell's another very underrated actor in the films that he's been in, and an amazing guitar player. But that is an amazing movie all in itself. But those are the things that I love about John Wayne, is the outlier films, the films where he broke the mold, and he did it willingly, and he did it well. And I think it showed that he was actually a legitimately good actor, and he wasn't just playing one part the entire time. Like I said, even though he did, even when he was playing in the war films, he was kind of the same type of attitude and character as the Duke. When you watch Sands of Iwo Jima or Flying Tigers, it's the same. It's the same thing. The same type of character. So it was kind of the character that he was known for and typecast as, but he could play his other characters. That's the point. But now you look over at Eastwood's films. Now, Eastwood is a completely different animal because there's a lot smaller amount of films, but they are spread out over a much larger period. Well, I shouldn't say much larger, but a decent period of time. And also, these films, he's kind of playing almost the same character in basically a lot of the films, except for maybe a couple of the later ones. And that is, he's the outsider that comes into town, and he clashes with the bad guy, and then eventually he kills the bad guy. And maybe he gets roughed up or beat up or something along the way, or something happens to him. Maybe he gets shot or something, or they try to hang him or something. Clint Eastwood in his movies is a lot more human, I guess, than John Wayne in some ways, because John Wayne does get hurt in a lot of his movies, but at the same time, usually it doesn't inhibit him as much as maybe it would if a normal everyday person. Clint Eastwood, there's hang him high at the beginning of it. They literally hang him. Before somebody shoots the rope out, and stuff like that, or he gets beat up in, I think, all three of the Dollars movies. He gets the crap beat out of him at some point. Joe Kidd, I'm pretty sure at the beginning of that he gets knocked out and stuff. Unforgiven, I think at various points he gets beat up. I'm trying to remember specific scenes. The only one actually I think that I can remember where he didn't get the shit beat out of him was Pale Rider. But Clint Eastwood, I feel like, was a lot more of a human character most of the time, and he looked a lot more of a human character. Again, he was tall, he was lanky, he was thin, but at the same time, he was believable in somebody that could, handle a gun, and he had that 1,000-yard stare, especially back in the Dollars trilogy where he had that 1,000-yard stare that just like it went through you like a laser beam. That was something that John Wayne couldn't do. John Wayne was intimidating in his physical presence. Clint Eastwood is intimidating by his aura almost. Like Clint Eastwood, the way that he conducts himself, his body language in those movies, it just screams, "I'm a badass. Don't screw with me." And it's an amazing thing when you watch it because again, it's not even like he's just putting on an act either. He can back it up for a majority because the amount of people that he murders in those movies, the sands run red. But looking at the various stages, in the early part of all of it, before he was getting kind of involved in the story and the directing share, it was a lot of spaghetti westerns. Like I said, he had the Sergio Leone trilogy with the Dollars trilogy. You had other stuff mixed in there like Joe Kidd, which I think was maybe a little bit later in like the late '70s. And some other movies like that were in his early filmography, and those were kind of, again, he's kind of playing the same character. They even dress him the same in a lot of them. He's dressed very similarly in Joe Kidd to the way he's dressed in some of the Dollars trilogy films. Maybe the poncho's a bit different, or he's wearing a coat here, but he usually always has that ascot around his neck, and similar clothing in certain circles. And again, there are outliers to that as well, where there are some of them that go a little bit darker, like stuff like High Plains Drifter, which is actually one of my favorite films by him. I did a movie spotlight on that actually, and looking at the total part of that early part of Eastwood's career, it was mostly made up of those films. It was kind of sporadic, except for the Dollars trilogy ones. I think those were kind of evenly spaced apart, but he was kind of dotting those in and out with his cop movies because Dirty Harry was getting very popular at the time as well. So the Dollars trilogy came, and then immediately after that, he had success with the Dirty Harry series. Or it might have been during, actually, now that I think about it. But those movies were kind of mixed together in the time frame. And then after Dirty Harry started getting more and more spaced apart, then he started doing westerns again, and that's in the mid to late '70s, I believe, is when he did High Plains Drifter, which, like I said, is my favorite film with him. And he actually directed it as well. It was not his first directing credit though, but I love that movie because it deconstructs the western to a point where it doesn't. It's a movie that doesn't feel like a western, but it is a western, and I know that's going to sound weird considering how much I enjoy westerns, but it doesn't resemble the prototypical western. I mean, Clint Eastwood, when he comes in that movie, within the first 10 minutes of the film, I believe 10 to 15 minutes, he has raped somebody, shot I think at least two people, and also gotten a haircut. So I mean, there's just a bunch of random stuff in that. He has a couple of great lines. Like there's a point where he's trying to train the townspeople to take out these guys that are coming to murder them after they got out of jail. And the town, I think the former sheriff or whatever, is behind him, and he's trying to take out a knife. He's going to try and kill him, and Clint Eastwood doesn't even look over at him. He says, "You're going to look awful funny with that knife sticking out of your ass." And then he just puts the knife away. Again, Clint Eastwood kind of just exemplifies that badass. But the thing is that a majority of the time in Clint Eastwood movies, he's not the character with the heart of gold. He's the scoundrel almost, in a lot of cases. He's the unlikely or unwilling hero. He's doing something for ulterior motives, and not out of the kindness of his heart. He's not just offending people or doing something like that. Again, there are exceptions to that rule. You can look at stuff like The Outlaw Josie Wales, which I also really love by him. And it's films kind of in that vein where he starts off as basically like a cold-blooded killer or something like that, and then he develops a heart afterwards. And a lot of the movies he doesn't because of the time frame. But he's really just kind of the scoundrel in a lot of cases. He's just kind of that guy who kind of brushes with the law every once in a while. He's a drifter. He's a loner. He has no real past, and we know nothing about his past, and we don't need to know anything about his past. Again, like The Man with No Name. But then afterwards, he started getting into westerns that kind of dabbled in different things. Again, a lot like High Plains Drifter, that kind of led into this, where you have stuff like Pale Rider. Now, Pale Rider is it's an interesting movie from the aspect of Clint Eastwood's character, because he actually does have a character arc in this if you pay attention to, unlike his previous films in terms of an actual, like, having a character that has a past. He's a preacher who shows up in this kind of mountain mining town, and there are these people that are basically fighting against this big company that's going to come in and mine the mountain. And they're trying to kick the people out, and they're trying to make it hell for them and stuff. And they're basically using any excuse that they can to get them out of there. And then this preacher shows up, played by Clint Eastwood, and basically they think that the preacher's giving them all courage to stay and whatever, and they got to kill the preacher. So he brings in the guy who plays the mayor is the same guy that plays the doctor in the thing, but he brings in this guy and his 7 marshals, and basically Clint Eastwood and this guy have a past together. And we learn that this guy apparently emptied an entire chamber, like an entire 6 rounds of a 6-shooter through Clint Eastwood because he has a bunch of these bullet wounds on him. And Clint Eastwood is probably the least preachery preacher I've ever seen, and there is a great scene in this where he lights up a bunch of dynamite and blows up like a water mining rig, which is pretty hilarious. But in this movie, he's a bit of, like I said, he has a bit of a past. He still has the showdown at the end. He kills all the guys. Which, by the way, when he kills the marshal and his 7 sub marshals or whatever, those kills are hilarious. I mean, there's a point where he just strangles a guy or he shoots a guy. They're just wandering through the town and he's just appearing and disappearing. Like in that one, it feels almost like he's a ghost, but he's not. Because that's the thing is other people have said oh, Pale Rider, he's a ghost. Like no, they never really say he's a ghost. In High Plains Drifter, he's a ghost. Which I guess, by the way, spoiler for that. But in Pale Rider, I don't think he's a ghost. I think he's just a dude who got really fucked up one time by a guy emptying 6 bullets through his chest. And I think that's the only reason why he's probably maybe not a ghost is because they don't have a moment where he kind of comes out of nowhere in terms of but they never explicitly say. Even the guy that knows him, the big marshal, never explicitly says shouldn't you be dead or something like that, or I killed you. I don't think he ever says I killed you or something like that. But it's different in High Plains Drifter because you know who he is at the end of the movie. You know that he's actually a ghost. But like I said, Pale Rider is kind of a good one for me. It's a solid Western. It exemplifies the good things about Clint Eastwood's portrayals. And then you jump over and you jump into pretty much, I wouldn't say, I think it was the last Western that Clint Eastwood did, if I remember correctly, but that is Unforgiven. And Unforgiven is the farthest from the contemporary Western that I think you can really get. It has a somewhat contemporary storyline where Clint Eastwood plays this guy named William Money, and you have a Gene Hackman who plays this uppity marshal named Little Bill, who's kind of a famous gunfighter. And basically, what happens is Clint Eastwood takes his friend Morgan Freeman and this kid, and they're gonna go avenge this prostitute who got her face cut up and stuff like that. And basically that's kind of the idea for it. And it takes the Western to a different level because of the way that it's portrayed and the way that it's shown. There's a scene near the end of the movie where Clint Eastwood was a famous gunfighter. This is basically, he's aging now. So at the end, near the end of the movie, he can't make a shot on a guy who's been shot. He looks like he's been shot in the stomach. And basically he can't hit him with his rifle, and the guy's just kind of crawling there, and it's like, give him some water. They're yelling at him like, give him some water if he's thirsty. We're not going to shoot you. Stuff like that. It's like you actually, the characters actually feel bad when they shoot and kill somebody. And they have another one where the younger guy that's with them kills a guy who's on the toilet. He shoots him right in the chest, kills him, and then runs away. And he actually feels bad about that afterwards. Most of the time when you have those westerns, it's like, all right, somebody get the corpse out of the way. I got to have a drink. It's mostly kind of that attitude. So it's a very far departure from it. And then at the end of the movie, you kind of go back to it a little bit because you have Clint Eastwood kind of filtering back his man with no name, High Plains Drifter type of character, which he's been going away from a bit during the course of the movie, to somebody who's a bit more emotionally connected, I guess. But at that end scene, he just goes right back. He goes back to that cold, I'm just gonna kill everybody type of thing that he does in Pale Rider at the end. And he walks into this bar with Gene Hackman and everybody else in it, and he then proceeds to execute people in order with a shotgun, where he kills the bartender because he stuck Morgan Freeman's corpse up in front of his building. And then he proceeds to kill everybody in the room, including Gene Hackman, which, if I remember correctly, he shoves a shotgun barrel in his mouth, pulls the trigger, but we don't actually see the actual anything happen. He just pulls the trigger and leaves. And then you have a little thing at the end where he says William Money returned to wherever he was from and made good with dry goods and stuff like that. And then it goes to credits. But the end of that movie, I think, is what initially makes it great, because the entire film, you're being told on kind of a narrative level that this is a foreign western. This isn't a western that American audiences are necessarily used to or looking for. But then at the end of it, you have that kind of return to what you had in a John Wayne-esque western, where he takes out all the bad guys and then rides off. You've just preceded that with so much depression and horrible, emotional things, that, you kind of need that release at the end of just mindless slaughter almost. And kind of a little bit of reasoning behind it too, because again, it's Clint Eastwood doing it, so it's always going to be entertaining. But I think that's where you have the difference between the two of them, is that Clint Eastwood could play a different type of cowboy every once in a while, but he was kind of almost relegated to that kind of badass kind of drifter sort of role for the most part. Again, like, he plays in almost every single western he's in, other than Unforgiven, I think, is the only one where they actually give him a place of origin. And the Outlaw Josie Wales a little bit, but they don't really, they tell you he's from Missouri, but basically that's about it. And then you know about his past going in. So I stand corrected. That character also has a bit of that, but majority of the other ones don't. I was going to say, even in the Sergio Leone ones, he has literally no name. That's what he's known as. But John Wayne, on the other hand, is somebody who, he could play two very different characters. He could play the true blue hero, which is, he was known for, which he did in a majority of his roles, but he could also play the jaded asshole. And I think he played them equally well. And that's why I really love when he plays a jaded character, because it shows that he could actually act. I hate when people say that certain actors can't act in some respects if they've, over the course of their careers, especially legendary ones. It's like, oh, John Wayne can't act. He always plays the same character. It's like, okay, watch this movie. Tell me if he plays the same character. That's kind of the funny argument that I have with people every once in a while. But, Eastwood is, at this point, I think, is the more beloved, obviously, probably because he's still alive. But, I think John Wayne may have been in some ways a superior actor to him, at least in the theater of the Western. I wouldn't say that overall, because I think Clint Eastwood has proven over time that he is a much, much better actor than a majority of old and new Hollywood, and a very good director, which John Wayne, I don't believe, ever directed a film. But I think in the realm of Westerns, I think I would still give Wayne the edge, but that's just talking to me today. You could talk to me tomorrow and I might say something different. But, this has just kind of been a video comparing and contrasting the two different kinds of Westerns from Wayne and Clint Eastwood. But I want to know what you think. Who's your favorite? Do you like John Wayne? Do you like Clint Eastwood? Are you somebody that likes both, kind of like me? And put your favorite films from them down below. And any of them, it doesn't matter. Even some of the funny ones, like John Wayne's The Conqueror. Oh, good God, the Howard Hughes movie. That is a bizarre point in history. But as usual, put your comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?